Greetings, and welcome to another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In today's Todd Talk, we'll continue talking about executive functioning skills. And so, just to remind you, executive functioning skills are those skills that students must possess in order to be successful. So, let's take an assignment in general. And so, you'll take the executive functioning skills of being able to plan and organize and manage your time. You have to do that at the start of things. In order to continue working, you have to have self-control. You have to have flexibility. You have to have perseverance and metacognition. And then, of course, to finish out, you have to have grit and you have to have focus. So it's a combination of all these executive functioning skills that allow a student to be successful, just as is a combination of these executive functioning skills that allow a human being to be successful. So what we're going to be talking about in today's Todd Talk is the executive functioning skill of attentiveness or focus. Now, this is a really important one because no matter how much you plan and organize yourself, no matter how flexible you are, no matter how much grit you possess, if you cannot focus on the task that you are trying to accomplish, it is going to be very challenging to get that task done. So what we want to do is we want to build the focus of our students. As you can see from this graphic, kids develop more focus the older that they get. So the average 6-year-old can focus anywhere from 12 to 30 minutes at best. And then by the time they get to be 12-year-olds, that is double. So they can go from 24 to 60 minutes. Although I'm sure there are some teachers that would argue that some don't even have that attention span. By the time students get into high school, they're expected to sit through 45-minute lecture periods. And when they get into college, 3-hour seminars. So we eventually build this endurance for focus, but it's got to start somewhere. So even if you're teaching older students, they may not have never developed the concentration skills that they need in order to be successful and to have that focus and attentiveness that they need in order to complete their work. And of course, we have students that have ADHD who have real difficult focusing and may have accommodations and may have an IEP that account for that. But we have to be intentional. We have to be purposeful about teaching focus in our classroom by doing a few strategies that we're going to talk about today. The first thing I want to talk about, though, before we get to that point is, what does lack of focus in the class look like? In other words, what are the signs that a student is unable to focus? And so it could manifest itself in a few ways. One of these ways is just simply not completing tasks. Because they don't have focus, they don't get their work done because they're getting distracted by every shiny thing or by anything and everything that could cause them to lose focus. So it's not a follow through. So, and that's not necessarily a lack of grit, so to speak, because maybe they are gritty, but they're not focused enough to continue on the task. They get sidetracked with other things. So they may be working the entire time. They're just not focused on what they need to be focused on. It could be that they give up on activities. So because they lack that focus, they get frustrated and they just simply give up. And so that's where the lack of grit that does come into play. So it's important to have focus in order to be able to have grit. It's your disorganized student. Because they're not focused, they're doing this, they're playing with that, they're messing with this, fiddling with that, and they're not terribly organized in their thoughts or in their day-to-day practice. So there's just a lack of organization. This is an obvious one. They could be easily distracted. We often use the joke of squirrel, which is from the movie Up, which is a dog who can't pay attention for very long because he always sees things like dogs do and gets distracted by them. And so we have students who are like this, that will get distracted by something going on in the classroom. With the use of technology, it becomes even more difficult because they have this device in front of them that has billions of distractions, whether it's like playing video games or watching a movie or whatever. So we are in a day and age where electronics, as wonderful as they are and as much as they provide, also make it more difficult to get students focused. Because if you look at what students, the average length of a YouTube video or a TikTok, there's a reason why TikTok is so short, because it doesn't have to be much longer, because if it was much longer, kids would simply stop watching. Could be forgetting instructions. So if you say, hey, I want you to do this, and this, students hear this and this, and then they lose focus afterwards. They just don't pay attention, and they don't know what to do after the fact. It could also be that they just get off task. So you're asking them to do one thing, and you turn around, they're doing something else, and that's very frustrating. Sometimes lack of focus manifests itself in discipline issues, so such as getting off task, and then you have to get a student back on task, and it might become a power struggle. But in addition to that, when students get distracted themselves, they tend to pull other people with them. It's kind of like that person that falls into the water, and then someone comes to rescue them, and they just grab onto that person and take them down with them. And so a student who lacks focus but doesn't have anything to entertain themselves or to occupy their focus will turn to someone else to possibly do that. And so as a result, then it gets that person off task, and so on and so forth, and it becomes a discipline issue. You may be asking yourself, yes, my students can focus, but what do I do about that? It's got to be more than just requiring them or demanding that they focus. You have to set up the culture, you have to set up the environment, you have to use strategies in your classroom that are conducive to them being focused, and that take away some of those distractions that can cause students to become off task and to lack focus. And so I want to talk about 10 strategies today that you can use in your classroom that will help students to maintain this focus and keep this focus. So number one is, you would think this is really simple, but give them something to focus on. Give them a learning target. What is their goal? So, and this should be very clear. This should be stated very clearly. It should be written on the board. It should be on any papers that they're getting. But this is what Hattie calls visible learning, where expectations and teacher clarity are making it very obvious what students are supposed to be working on. And because they can see that finish line, because you have made it obvious what target they're shooting for, they're going to have a better chance of success, because they can see the pathway to where they're going. And sure, there might be other distractions along the way, but if they can keep their focus on that and keep moving through, then they're going to get to the end and be able to accomplish what you're asking them to accomplish. So what this might look like in the classroom is, if you're doing a lesson, and even if you have content standards that as an overall goal, are there kind of what are called micro tasks that you want students to do to be able to keep them focused? It doesn't mean breaking it down to the point where you have like only 5 minutes of work, and then something else, and then something else, and then something else. It can be a longer term goal, but at the same time, some of your really long term goals, you may have to break down into these micro tasks. So it's giving them something that is doable, that is attainable, that they can accomplish. And then students can stay focused for that amount of time, accomplish what you want to do, and then they get another task. And then once you get them to the point where they're using task initiation and other executive functioning skills successfully in your classroom, then you can start to do longer term things and take away some of those supports. But we can't assume, no matter what age the student is, that they're able to focus for these long periods of time. When students get to high school, I always find it amazing is that we expect them to be able to sit and listen for 45 minutes. We as adults have trouble listening for 45 minutes. I'm getting almost to the 10-minute mark in this video, and 10 minutes is about all the human brain, no matter even if you want to pay attention, it's usually the attention span of a human being is 10 minutes. Unless you refocus them, unless you redirect them, unless you have things in there that cause them to be refocused, you're only going to get 10 minutes. And yet we have students sit and listen for 45 minutes in a classroom. So strategy number one, give them something to focus on. Make sure it's really clear. Make sure it's written in student language. Some of those content standards can be really difficult to translate. And so they may not, it's hard for them to focus if they don't know what they're focusing on. So you don't want to make it like so elementary but you also don't want to make it so that they don't know what that they're doing. The second thing, so start and end, have starting and ending points to your lesson. So have an entrance ticket. And so an entrance ticket might look something like you see here. And so the idea of an entrance ticket is to just simply jumpstart the thinking of students, to get them excited about a task that you're going to be doing. And so it shouldn't feel like tedious work. It should be like you're trying to jumpstart their thought process so that when they actually start to think, they're warmed up. Think about someone who is going to go running. They don't just immediately start running. They're going to stretch. They're going to get warmed up. They're going to get themselves pumped up, maybe through music or something like that. But they're not just going to simply start running, because otherwise they're not going to be unable to maintain it, because maybe they get a muscle pull or something happens where they're not able to accomplish that. But we need to get students to stretch. And entrance tickets are a really good way of doing that, because they get students thinking, and then they can go into the task that you're asking them to do them with more focus, because they understand what they're getting into, and they kind of warmed up. So they're kind of hitting the ground running when it comes to that. Exit tickets are the same way. Exit tickets take that focus and kind of close it off. There's nothing worse than a really weak finish to something. So if it just trails off, students don't know where things have ended. So having an exit ticket to kind of close that thinking and to do that is going to be helpful for students to be able to say, okay, I accomplished this task. Here is my evidence that I was able to accomplish it. So you can use an exit ticket like you see here. Sometimes this could be something summative. Sometimes it can just be simple reflection. There's lots of ways that you can do exit tickets. It doesn't have to be necessary, and it shouldn't be for a grade necessarily, but it should just be a way for students to kind of put in a period on the end of what they're doing. So it's that kind of that ending point. The third thing is we need to monitor teacher talk. So what I mean by that is, as teachers, we feel compelled to be in front of the classroom talking at students for long periods of time. And so I call this watching your mic time. So you don't want to be talking for more than 10 minutes at any given moment. I'm already breaking that rule, of course, through this video, but regardless, when I'm in the classroom, I try to not talk for more than 10 minutes at a time. I got to the point in my classroom where I actually had a timer, and I would set it for 10 minutes, and I would say, I need your attention for 10 minutes. So all I'm asking is for 10 minutes. If you give me your attention, then you need to do what you're going to do. And I would set the timer, and I had to have 10 minutes to get in what I needed to get in. So I had to be very efficient with what I was teaching them. I couldn't get sidetracked myself, because as teachers, we can get sidetracked. I had a teacher in high school that what we would do every single class, he was my zoology teacher, we would figure out ways to get him distracted and talking about stories and getting him off task. And we wouldn't have to do any of the work that he wanted us to do, because we could easily get him off task. So as the teacher, you kind of have to model this. You have to stay focused. You have to stay efficient. You don't want to be speaking in front of the class for more than 10 minutes. This is not to say to not do any direct instruction. Sometimes you need to do some direct instruction, but it should not be for 45 minutes. It should be at most 10 minutes, which is what the average human brain, that's how long the brain rules work. So you need to watch your mic time. Strategy number 4, make sure you have breaks that are worked into it. So if you're asking students to work for a sustained period of time, are you giving them breaks? When I do workshops with teachers, if I have a 6-hour workshop, I am not going to be talking for 6 hours straight. I'm going to have activities mixed in there. I'm definitely going to have breaks scheduled so that people can go stretch their legs, get something to drink, get themselves refocused. Because there comes a certain point where people become saturated with what you're telling them, and they no longer can hear you. Not because they don't want to, but they're unable to, because they've just been sitting for so long being talked at. So we need to figure out ways to make sure that we shift the focus. And so I'm going to demonstrate that. I'm going to give you a 1-minute break for this video, which is going to start right now, and then I'll see you in 1 minute. might have done several things during that 1 minute break. You might have just stood up. You might have checked your email. You might have gotten to get a cup of coffee or to get a drink of water. There are several things that you might have done. But hopefully then by you coming back after that minute, or by spending that minute not focusing on me, you're able to focus on me better now. And so sometimes it may not be just giving students a random 1 minute break. It might be that you give them some activities to do, not activities, but some things to think about and some guidance for what they might do to help them with their focus. And so what that might look like is a break, something like this.
Hey, beautiful people. So for today's brain break, we're gonna do brain tapping. All right, we're gonna take our fingertips and we're just gonna start gently tapping the top of our head. Now, brain tapping is a really great activity to slow down our brain waves, to create a relaxing energy, and to soothe an active mind. So we're gonna start off by tapping the top gently, and we're gonna move to the sides. Good. And then we're gonna move to the back. With all our activities, we encourage you to smile, we encourage you to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. So we're gonna continue tapping. We can move all the way to the back of our necks, and we can bring it back up to the top. Now, if you suffer with allergies like me, you could tap your sinus areas, kind of like the top of your nose, front of your forehead. All right, if you suffer from headaches, this is really good as well. Just tap where that tension is, create that blood flow, and release that stagnant negative energy. We're gonna stay here for a few more seconds, and then we're slowly gonna bring our hands down. Now you can continue doing brain tapping. Brain tapping is also a great way to lead into some meditation. I hope you enjoy this activity. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Peace and love, people. Catch you later.
Sometimes it's giving them a different voice to listen to. So it shifted from my voice to this other person's voice. And sometimes it's the color. So you see that she has a red background and I have a different background to that. It could be the music. So all of these things are ways to help students to get focused. And so you may say, well, this is going to affect their task initiation. If I get them off task, then getting them back on task is going to be very difficult. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what is the quality of them staying on task if they're no longer able to focus? And so taking intentional breaks every so often is going to be really important. And like I said, sometimes those can just be, we're taking a water break, or we're taking a, go stretch your legs, walk around the hallway break. Other times it may be a little more focused. And so you have to decide what that's going to look like, but you do need to be purposeful about giving breaks. The next thing is 5, which is keep students moving. So if students are simply seated at their desk all the time, that is going to be really tough. So I like active classrooms. I like noisy classrooms. I like classrooms where students are doing things and they're more kinesthetic than they are just sitting and listening. And so I try to have activities where students are getting up out of their seats. I don't have assigned seats. Kids don't even have to sit in a seat. They could stand if they were. I had a student that liked to stand the whole time, and I allow him to do that. So we have to make sure that we're keeping students active. So when you walk into a classroom and you see students sitting, being talked at, it might look something like this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised or lowered raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that...
So we see something like that, and it's very humorous. But it's really kind of sad, because as humorous as this video is, and you see the reactions that the students have on their faces, this is sometimes what I see when I walk into classrooms. I see a students just sitting there being talked at as the teacher drones on, for the entire period, and students aren't up and active. They're not moving. Why do you think? Why do you think that they've been trained when that bell rings, they get up like cattle out of a chute? Because they've been sitting, being inactive for so long. They just want to get up and stretch their legs a little bit. So I like active classrooms. I like making sure that students are not just sitting for long periods of time. There's a reason why I've worked in a couple of breaks in our first 20 minutes together, because I want to make sure you're not just sitting here watching it the entire time, that you have some opportunities to look at something else, or the opportunity to stretch your legs or move about should you choose to do that. Number 6 I'm going to talk about is don't give them too many things to do at once. So we've already talked about that multitasking is nearly impossible. Trying to do 2 tasks at the same time means that neither task is going to be done very well. So we need to take one task at a time. Now, sometimes students don't know how to do that. If you give them several tasks, they may attempt several tasks at the same time. So you do need to break it down for them sometimes. So if you're asking them to do some work, it might look something like you see here. And what you see here is broken down. These are all the steps you're going to be doing. And it's a fine line. You don't want to micromanage them. You don't want to get to the point where you're like 5 minutes of this, you're really doling out like the time slots and whatever. And that way students are not able to learn other executive functioning skills, such as task initiation or perseverance or metacognition. And so we want to make sure that students have that chance to practice those skills. And so you'll get to know your class, and you'll have to figure out, how much do I need to provide and how much can I pull back? Could you have one learning target that everyone's shooting towards? But then you may have students that you have to break that down even more. We'll talk about that in a further strategy. Strategy number 7 is make sure that you set the environment. So I often play classical music in my classroom, so that when students were thinking, there wasn't that background noise that comes with a classroom where people are maybe thinking. Or so I tried to set an environment where students could come in, they could choose whatever seats they wanted. I had flexible seating. I had, like I said, classical music playing most times when they were doing independent work. I made sure that the environment was conducive to that, to whereas they could keep their focus, and it wasn't full of distractions. I didn't play like rock music that had lyrics that can be distracting. I purposely chose classical music that didn't have lyrics. And so the music was the only thing playing. And as a result, students could fill that space with their thoughts, with their thinking, with conversations with others. And so you have to be purposeful about setting that environment in your classroom. If you have a classroom that has lots of distractions, windows, I love windows in a classroom. But for an elementary school classroom, it can be a distraction, because kids see someone out mowing the lawn, or they see literally a squirrel out there, or something that they see is going to be distracting to them. So maybe at times when there's activity going outside, you close the blinds so that students are not going to be distracted by that. One distraction I see a lot, or hear a lot actually, in schools is the announcements. Announcements should only be used in the direst of situations, where you absolutely have to come on and make an announcement, either because something's you have to find a student that's you can't find, or whatever. But I'm at some schools where there's announcements all the time. I'm shooting these videos, and I can't get through a 20-minute video without being interrupted by some announcement or other. So it does help as school administration also to not be getting on the PA system all the time, because imagine students are working, they're focused, they're doing what they're, and then all of a sudden, boom, like an announcement comes on, pulls them out of what they're doing. And it's not a break, because it's overstimulating. And then they have to try to get back to work. That can be really challenging. So try to cut down on the distractions that are around in your classroom. It doesn't mean to be distraction free, but it does mean to control what you can control. Number 8 is having student-centered learning. So again, this goes back to keeping kids active, not being in front of the classroom for more than 10 minutes. So have student-centered, but there does need to be structure in place. You can't just say, hey, you have an hour to work on this, go. You have to have a structure in place. When I do project-based learning, it seems very unstructured, but it is extremely structured, but the structure is very subtle. It's a framework underneath the work that's going on. And students are very familiar with that framework, and so they follow that framework. But without that structure there, it would be chaos. I think the biggest thing that stops teachers from doing more student-centered learning is they're worried that it won't be organized. They're worried that students won't be focused. They're worried that students are going to get off task, but they're not going to do that if you have a structure. So if you say, okay, this is the structure we're using, this is the structure we're following, and then students can do what they need to do within those, but they're getting to make more decisions. It's more student-centered. They're the ones that are the ones doing the learning rather than being talked at. So if you're going to have student-centered learning, which I highly recommend, you also need to make sure that structure is there. But the structure should not be so obvious that it inhibits students from being able to do student-centered work. So again, a fine line. Number 9 is the idea of chunking work. So when you do have activities to do, can it be broken down even further? And I kind of talked about this already, but it needs to be a fine line. You need to give them enough steps to whereas they are staying focused, but not so many steps that they're just like, they're not making any decisions for themselves. So let's take this activity right here. I'm asking students to do where I want them to read this chapter and answer these questions, a very traditional thing that you might see in a classroom. And so I could simply say to them, read this chapter and answer these questions. Or I could chunk it up a little bit. I could say, okay, I want you to read that this is a chapter, but it's got 4 sections. I want you to read section 1 and then reflect upon what you've read before you move on to the next one. And here are some possible reflection points that you can do. And so it's going to break it down. It's going to chunk it to whereas, because what happens if you just say, read the whole chapter, students are going to forget what they read at the beginning, possibly. And so it's going to chunk it, and it's going to put it into smaller parts and make it more palatable for them to be able to focus on the comprehension that they need to focus on. And then when it comes to answering the questions, I don't just say, answer the questions. I may say, answer the questions. And I may say, and then talk about them with a neighbor or collaborate with someone else. There might be other aspects to that where it's chunked to whereas it's not just these general statements. But I need to make sure that that learning target is there. By the end of this, because what I've not said is, what do I want to accomplish by the end of this? So what I want to accomplish here is my learning target. And my learning target in this case is going to be to understand how airplanes work, because that's what the article is about. So that's what I want them to get from that. Strategy number 10 is the idea of getting their attention and having a routine to your classroom. So routines are really important. Not so much where they are crippling for students, but students, the best classrooms that I see is when I go in, teacher gives the assignment, kids start doing student-centered learning, but kids know exactly what they need to do. They're on task, they're focused, they're engaged in the learning. And the reason for that is because of the routines that the teacher has established. You don't just do that on day one. That's something that needs to be established in your classroom. You need to say, okay, if you need to do this, you need to set kind of parameters of what students can and cannot do. Okay, if students, this is where you can move to, this is where you can go. These are so having these routines is going to be really, really important, because when you have those routines, again, it acts as that structure to whereas students then can do whatever that they need to do and are able to stay focused at the same time. It is also important that when you're giving instructions, that you're clear with those instructions and that you have the attention of your class. I'll see teachers that will start to give students instructions when students are talking. Well, the students that are talking and the students that are listening to the other people talking are not hearing anything. Make sure you get the attention of your class. Don't talk too much. But again, that's a routine that you establish. Look, when I talk, I'm not going to talk for very long, but I ask that you really pay attention. That's a routine that you can set in your classroom so that students know that's the expectation. Could be something like a clap. I'm always amazed at the ability of the clap to get people's attention, where you go, and then they repeat that. And all of a sudden, I may have a room full of 100 kids, And they do that clap. Not everyone's doing the clap because not everyone's paying attention, but enough people that they hear it and everyone gets focused. And so it's just little tricks like that, or little routines, establishing little routines like that. They're going to enable students to be more focused when you're giving them instruction. Because if they're not focused on the instruction, they don't know the target. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're working toward. They don't know any of that because they didn't hear it. And if it's not written down or something like that, they may not understand. Even if it is, they may not understand it. So make sure you get the attention of your students, establish routines in your classroom so that students know what they can and cannot do, and then they can work within that routine. Another thing that you can do to practice focus in your classroom and to provide structure for students when it comes to focus is to be aware of mindfulness. So mindfulness is simply, it's kind of linked in with metacognition, which is just being aware, or be mindful of how you're focusing. What are you doing to focus? What are some specific strategies that you're using? You can't just tell a kid focus, but you could tell a kid focus by doing this, or what are some strategies that work for you, because it's not going to work the same for everyone. So what I'm going to share here are some exercises called Focus 5 exercises, and these were developed by the Strategic Education Research Partnership. And they're really simple activities that you can do. And you might see these, you might say, well, I could use it with my elementary students, but I couldn't use it with high school students. That's not true. We sometimes assume that high school students have the focus because they're older, or they have the focus because they've been sitting through classes for a long time, for many years. But we need to be mindful of our high school students as well, and do exercises such as this. And so I have a link here that you see to these exercises. There are 7 of them. I'm going to walk you through just one of them so that you can see what this is like. So this is exercise number 1, and it's called to breathe deep. And it says to pause after reading each phrase aloud. So I'm going to read these phrases, and then I'm going to pause to give people a chance to do that. Sit up tall in your chair with your feet flat on the floor. If you feel comfortable, close your eyes to tune out distractions. Take a deep breath in, letting go of any tension as you breathe out. Slowly relax your neck and your shoulders. Now relax your arms and your hands. Let go of any tension you may be feeling in any part of your body. Breathe in slowly through your nose, like you're smelling hot chocolate, filling your lungs with air. Let the breath go, slowly exhaling out your mouth like you're cooling it off. Take 5 to 10 more breaths, allowing each breath to become slower and deeper than the one before. Now, shift your breathing so that you breathe in and out of your nose. Keep following your breath as it enters through your nose, fills up your lungs. Feel your lungs and diaphragm expand. Follow your breath as you exhale and as your lungs deflate. Keep breathing calmly and deeply for a few more moments. Now, take 5 deep breaths at your own speed. When you are ready, slowly open your eyes. So this is a script, and it's actually interesting. I did scripts like this when my wife was pregnant with our children and she was giving birth. We used a method that was called hypnobirthing, and it was using mindfulness to deliver a child without using any medicine. And so my wife gave birth to our two children, and never had an epidural, never had any pain relief, any of that, and yet didn't experience any pain, because we were able to use these mindfulness scripts in order to do that. Now, that's a bit of an extreme example. With your students, you can do a simple one like this. This doesn't take more than a minute or so, and it's going to get your students focused. It's going to make them more mindful of things. It's going to make them more aware of things. And so you can use any of these 7 activities that I've included here to walk them through this. They're not very long. And you may say, my high school students will never go for this. I beg to differ. They'll probably love it. I always I loved reading out loud to my junior high students and high school students, and they loved it. They were very attentive. They paid attention. And we may say that's students like to be read to anymore. Well, they did in this case when I would read them books. And so I wouldn't read them entire books, of course, but I would give them a chance to do that. Here's another, if you don't feel comfortable doing the reading of the script yourself, you can use a video like this. You may or may not have noticed that this is one of the longer videos. It's clocking in around 40 minutes. This was done purposefully. I wanted to have a longer video so you could to work on focus. And so if this video seemed like 40 minutes to you, then I did not do a good job of helping you with your focus. But if the video seemed like, wow, that flew by pretty quickly, then hopefully I was successful in some of the activities I did. I just want to give you one more piece of advice to think about when it comes to student focus. You have to build endurance. You can't expect, like you saw how the older students get, the more endurance that they gain. But keep in mind, that's an average. There are some students that, who even though they're in high school, don't have any focus, and some kids who are younger that have a lot of focus. So we have to build endurance by setting the environment in our classroom and building up that long term. So when I do project-based learning, I do not start with a 3-week project. I'll start with a mini project, and this does a couple things. So and it's only like maybe last a day or two. And what this does is get them familiar with the structure of how a project works and the routines that we're establishing. But it also doesn't require them to be focused for really long periods of time. And then as I build up to that, and I have a week-long project, and then maybe a 2-week project. And at the very end of the school year, I had a 6-week project with students. We're working on those executive functioning skills. I have hopefully built up their endurance. I've built up their focus, and they're able to sustain that and persevere through that and keep their task initiation and all the other executive functioning skills that they would use for such a long-term project. But the routines are in place. The breaks are in place. The focus is better, and you've built up the endurance of your students to be successful.